Hey everyone, Cryptic Athena here, and today I want to talk about the Lunarian race and its possible relationship with the sun god Nika and the sun god Nika's relationship with potentially all three of the monster trio and King's race. So let's just dive into it. So first things first, let's start off with King and Sanji. And this first part is going to be a reiteration of some stuff I said in my last video about King's Race. So if you already watched that, you can probably skip this, but this is going to be a comparison of King and Sanji. So there may be some new information here. So first time we hear about Lunarians is in chapter 951. Big Mom is trying to recruit King into her crew. She says she says he would be a very unique addition for her crew because his race is supposed to be extinct, which is interesting. His race, assumedly the Lunarians, now that we know that, the uniqueness about it is that it is also a race that can control fire or burst into flames or manipulate flames in some way. Lunarians also seem to be part of the Skypian people, or I should say Sky people, because we have the Skypians, the Shandians, and I forgot the other one. But we have those three races of people, and then we have King's race, Lunarians, which is very interesting. But King is the only one we've seen with wings to be, and we know he is probably Lunarian. So it's safe to assume that he is a part of the Sky People race, and we can also assume that all the Sky People are at least they at least share a common ancestor with Lunarians. I would even go as far as to say that Lunarians, as an entire grouping, is probably all the Sky People, because we learn in the Enel cover story that all the Sky People that we know of are from the moon. And Lunarians, the prefix of Ian is lunar, which, if you don't already know, lunar is a different word for the moon, or it's a way to describe moon things that had to do with the moon. So that's very interesting. But the other thing is that King's wings may be due to genetic modification or him being a Skypian, but had a lineage factor altered on him to either unlock Lunarian powers or were given to him. Similarly to how people are thinking about Sanji, but we'll get to him very soon. Why would I say that the wings on King aren't Lunarian? Well, the only reason why I'm saying that is because I think Lunarians come from the sun god Nika. I think he is at least a part of the factor that created the Lunarians. At the very least, the subset of Lunarians that can create fire, because I just said that Lunarians might be all Sky people, and obviously all Sky people can't control fire, at least that not that we know of. And I think it's I think it's plausible to say that Nika is related to the Lunarians because of his silhouette, his head. We can see that he has very fire-like hair, and that could very well just be hair. But for the theory, I would say it's very similar to how King's fire around his head or in the back of his head is stylized, which obviously fire, fire hair, similar vibes to like Hades from Disney. There may be some sort of connection there. And Sun God, you know, when you take sun in the name in the title sun god and you apply it to like other media, typically sun-based characters will have fire powers. In my last video, I talked about Solgaleo from Pokemon. What was it? Pyron from Darkstalkers and Kid Icarus. And then Ra from Smite. But also in Egyptian mythology, I believe he has fire-based powers, but I could be wrong because I haven't done a ton of research into that particular subject. That's all to say that Nika either is or isn't related to Lunarians. I do personally believe that he, at the very least, possibly had started a line of the fire manipulation side of Sky People, assuming that Lunarians is what King's race is a part of. And I think it'd be very interesting if Nika had the power to contribute to a whole class of race. That'd be very interesting in my opinion. And maybe Lunarians, if my initial theory about them all being sky people, maybe Lunarians need a way to tap into their powers. So let's say this. King didn't have his fire powers until he joined Kaido's crew. We know that Kaido has ties to Vegapunk with what's his face? King or Queen and Caesar. Obviously Caesar has ties with Doflamingo, and Doflamingo, I believe he was a part of like the whole, yeah, he was with Kaido because he was the Joker card. Meanwhile, he has Queen and King on the main crew. But obviously, Doflamingo knows stuff, and then he has Caesar under him, which Caesar knew Vegapunk, and he knew all that sorts of stuff. So it's very possible that that King may have had his fire powers unlocked by Vegapunk. Uh, Not necessarily because he's a Lunarian, but because all Sky people have that power within them. But obviously, we've never seen any other Sky person use fire powers. Now that's all fine and good, but how does that relate to Sanji? Well, the main theory, well, the running theory that everyone is having is that he what his altercation to his DNA was something to do with Lunarian lineage factor, which would make sense and wouldn't be far fetched. And obviously, he doesn't have wings, so he can't be half Lunarian. He could, I mean, he could be half Lunarian if half Lunarians don't have wings, or if it's like a recessive gene, if the wings are recessive, you know. But I do believe we've seen Sanji's mom, and we've obviously seen Judge. So there's no way that Sanji is half Lunarian unless Judge is hiding something. Because you maybe he might be hiding something with his like suit or whatever, but I doubt it. I think Sanji just had some altercation due to his DNA because Judge was that kind of guy. Moving on, we're gonna come back to Nika here real quick, and I'm talking about how Lunarians are potentially all sky people. Well, the first time we hear about a sun god is in Skypiea, which is where all the sky people that we've known about have been up until now. Because now we have King's race, and we assume that he's Lunarian, and Lunarians seem to have wings. And it's very possible that Lunarians are just a category of all sky people, but we've never known that up until now. So that's very interesting. But I want to point out another idea that I had about Luffy. And this is a theory I had in my last video about King as well, so if you've already seen that, you can skip this part. I think that Luffy's fire-based attacks, I am still on the fence about it, but I would like to point out that he may also be Lunarian, or the Gomu Gomu no Mi, something about devil fruits in general, but particularly for the Gomu Gomu no Mi, and why the world government had it was because the lineage factor of the Gomu Gomu was affected by the sun god Nika, or the previous user of it, who may have been Lunarian. And that is why Luffy can use fire-based attacks, such as Red Hawk and Red Rock. But I do like the idea of Luffy inheriting Ace's will, and that's why he can use fire-based attacks. Now, I think it'd be an interesting spin if the Gomu Gomu no Mi, the reason why it's special, is because the lineage factor was altered just with race alone, or just with the person who previously had it. That'd be an interesting thing. And it's not even like a destiny sort of thing. Obviously, if the Gomu Gomu no Mi did belong to the sun god Nika, and there's that whole theory that Joy Boy and the sun god Nika are this one and the same person, and everybody thinks that Joy Boy will be Luffy one day, which is very plausible, then obviously that makes it a destiny thing. But what if it's like the Gomu Gomu no Mi, the power that it has came from the sun god Nika, and whether or not he's Joy Boy doesn't matter. It's just that the Gomu Gomu Mi, the reason why it's special is that it had the possibility to manipulate fire. And it's not necessarily like Luffy was destined to get the fruit, but it's more like a uh, a coincidence, because when he uses Red Hawk, it's not like he's trying to do it. I don't remember in Fishman Island when he used Red Hawk the first time against Hody. Okay, so I just looked back at the first time we saw Red Hawk used in Fishman Island, and it doesn't seem that Luffy was surprised by Red Hawk. So Red Hawk is either a technique he developed himself, and I think it's very plausible that he's just manipulating the air around his arm so he can like heat up super fast and it comes back and it hits you with fire, you know? And again, that probably has something to do with Ace's willpower being bestowed onto him. But it could be also that Luffy is Lunarian, or at least 15 generations down the line, because he can't seem to manipulate fire all that well. And I mean, all of his brothers have fire, so that's interesting. But that's a bit more of a stretch. But I do think it's interesting that he can use fire in his attacks. Um, I didn't want to bring this up the first time, and I don't know how well this is going to stand in this video, but I just would like to point out that Luffy's Gear Second is an interesting ability, and it sort of came out of nowhere. Let's be honest, it sort of came out of nowhere. So, the interesting thing about the ability is that he heats up his body. Well, at least he is heated up when he uses the Gear Second ability because he's obviously steaming. We assume that's because he's pumping the blood in his body so fast that it's heating up the body some way, somehow. But it could also be either due to his Lunarian blood. That's the first time he's ever accessed Lunarian powers, somehow helping his fruit be manipulated and allowing him to use Gear Second. But it could also be the fruit itself being passed down from the sun god, and that somehow the sun god's fire powers, assuming that he has fire powers, was transferred into the fruit on a very minor scale. And that's just for Gear Second. Let's take it a step further and go into Luffy's possible awakening. Everybody is thinking, well, most people are thinking that Luffy's awakening or his Gear Fifth will have something to do with vulcanization, which is a superheating process of rubber to make it tougher for like tires and I believe bowling balls. So, it wouldn't be out of the ordinary if the way he does this is by accessing Lunarian traits from his own lineage factor or from the fruit's lineage factor that was altered by the previous owner, which would be a very interesting power to see. And I wouldn't be surprised if his awakening, assuming that it only affects himself and not his surroundings, if he had like maybe like fire styled hair or fire coming off of his body somehow, assuming that his awakening has something to do with vulcanization. And that would be very cool. And that's the whole Luffy part of this theory. But what about the sun and the moon representation in One Piece in general? Firstly, let's look at Lunarian's possible connection to the moon. In real life, the light from the moon is reflected sunlight, but we call it moonlight because obviously it's coming off the moon. It would be an interesting spin for Oda to take that real life fact and make a whole race based around it, because obviously we have the prefix of lunar in Lunarians, which means that they are from the moon or have something to do with the moon. So, it's possible that the reason why they have fire powers is that Oda just took a spin on the whole real life fact of moonlight being reflected sunlight. And then before learning about Lunarians, you could argue that the moon race that we had up until then were the Minks. They get their most powerful ability during a full moon, and you could even look at Carrot, the character of Carrot, and her Sulong form as a stand-in for the moon rabbit, which is a mythological being in Eastern folklore. And if you've ever watched Naruto, that person is Kaguya from like the final fight and one of the movies, I'm pretty sure. And that's everything for the moon. But for the sun is more heavily prevalent in One Piece, I would say. Because you have all this talk about dawn of a new age, whether it be for piracy or the government control. Romance Dawn, it was the before One Piece was One Piece. Romance Dawn was the original story. And then we have Nika himself, who a god that slaves look to for him to bring a dawn of freedom to them, which is very interesting. Who's who, as he says himself, there were stories of slaves praying to Nika to come save them. He tells this story to Jinbei after seeing his Sun Pirates tattoo, and somewhat implies that the slaves in the story were fishmen. What's interesting about this is that there is a small theory about the races in One Piece all having an elemental ability, or at least representing an element. Fishmen obviously represent water, Skypians represent air, and now Lunarians represent fire. There are also the minks who use electricity, and the stories of continent pullers, which you could stretch to represent the earth element. I think it's an interesting theory because Fishmen and Lunarians are somewhat opposite of each other with themes and powers. Jinbei and the Sun Pirates, who have the sun tattoos, but they use water abilities and not fire. Obviously, because they're fish. Meanwhile, the Lunarians, who have a moon related name, but use fire based abilities. And if you know anything about water in real life, at least with the ocean's tides, it can be manipulated by the moon. But perhaps at the end of the day, the reason why Lunarians are called Lunarians is because they're from the moon and have nothing to do with their powers. And I think it's very likely that they're just from the moon. So that's the sun and the moon in One Piece. But my final thing that I want to talk about is Zoro. Now this last part is the biggest stretch in this whole entire discussion. So let's just go point for point. Zoro is now heavily implied to be related to Shimochuki Ryuma and the Sumo Shimotsuki family entirely. And it's discovered that Ryuma is called the God of the Blade. And even in the translations, God of the Blade, I thought it might be retranslated to God of the Sword, but no, it's still God of the Blade, which is very interesting. But now we have another god in One Piece, now in relations to the blades. But of course, Ryuma was an mortal man, because we obviously see him walking around in Thriller Bark as a zombie. But it was a mortal man that specifically only used a sword, as far as we know. But perhaps this new information about a god of the blade not only relates to Ryuma, but also relates to the sun god Nika. Hear me out. The silhouette of sun god Nika may be related to several different things. Of course, possible relation to the Lunarians, maybe the original progenitor. I don't think that's a word. The original person that started off the Lunarians race, just because of the fire elements in his hair and him being a sun god, and sun gods typically having fire based powers. But we also see him carrying a sword and a spear. So that means the sun god was a warrior god as well. So you can make a stretch that he's not only the god of the sun, but also the god of the blades, because he's not only just using a sword, he's also using a spear. Here's where it gets a little crazy, but we also have supreme grade blades that Whitebeard has a supreme grade, and then so does Roger. Which is interesting because maybe supreme grade blades were made in honor of the sun god Nika. Furthermore, if it does turn out that Nika is part of the Lunarian race, it's possible that he created the foxfire techniques that Kinemon uses. I'm not saying that Kinemon or Zoro are Lunarians, because they both can use firefox techniques, but I am saying that Nika represents multiple different things in the One Piece world. He doesn't just represent the sun, but he also represents weapons / being a warrior, and his race of people, the Lunarians. Because of this, the Lunarians can create fire, and it's possible that he was the first person to use and probably created the foxfire techniques. And since then, those techniques have been passed down amongst sword wielders for generations. And everything that the monster trio has, the Gomu Gomu no Mi, perhaps belonging to Nika, Sanji being a Lunarian, and now Zoro, who can use the same techniques as God, will lead us into a dawn of freedom. Anyways, that's the theory, y'all. Uh, I hope you enjoyed. This one was just sort of like a just off the cuff type of deal. I have a bunch of notes here, but I thought I'd just roll with them and just bring up ideas and new ideas that I may not even have written in my notes. That's interesting. Very interesting. But I want to thank you all for watching. What did you all think of the theory? Do you think some parts may be pretty cool, or do you think some parts are like, eh? Or do you think some parts are just like, this is a stretch? Why the heck did you even put this in the video? Be sure to let me know in the comments below. Please like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you want, and follow me on Twitter to see my artwork for all my videos at Cryptic Hell, cryptic_HEL. Obviously, I didn't have an art piece for today's video, but that's because I didn't want to draw for this video. I'm very busy at the moment, so that's why there's no art for this video. Thank you all for watching, and have a good day, everyone.